Reddit, what family secret do you know that you shouldn't or wish you didn't know? Maybe NSFW. My dad had 2 brothers and a sister. They were all molested by their dad, my grandfather. My uncle killed himself because of this. My dad was caught molesting me by my mom and he killed himself. This is the first time I have actually ever typed this. Feel a bit better. Oh, I'm afraid to have kids of my own because of the molesty family history, but can't explain this to my wife, who is desperate to have children. Do I win the Reddit award for most ked up? My great-grandfather killed the man who raped his daughter. No one liked the murdered man enough to convict my relative. My grandfather, a native South Korean, fought in World War II. Sometime in the 1940s, when Japanese were occupying Korea, my grandfather took a knife and stabbed an unsuspecting Japanese soldier in the back. There was no real gore, so my grandfather took a picture of him and the dead soldier in sort of a buddy pose. Fast forward to 2008. By now, most of my family had moved to America, where I was born, and we lived in a more rural part of New York. When my grandfather died that year, all the neighbors came by, all 10 of them, and had a wake for him. We didn't have a lot of pictures of my grandfather, so my mother accidentally put up the picture of my grandfather and the dead soldiers. When my Japanese neighbors were saying their condolences, my neighbor's grandmother saw the picture. She says, "Wait, that's my husband. He disappeared in Korea." Because my grandfather and the Japanese soldier looked like friends, no one noticed he was dead. After a few minutes, my dad, who was preoccupied elsewhere, came over and blatantly said, "This is a picture of father and the Japanese soldier he killed in the 1940s. God, I'm 29 and I couldn't even imagine having a 15-year-old son. Are you kidding me? I can't even remember to water my plants because too much League of Legends. I was a mistake. No matter what I accomplish in life, it won't matter to them. They only had me because of my mother's religion. Once I defected from the religion, I was no longer good enough for them. Heard it through the window as I was leaving for a friend's house. I'm their biggest disappointment and failure. Etc. Fixed by popular demand. I will meet a nice, beautiful girl, eventually. I will have my home, my own family, and my own version of acceptance. My grandfather molested my mother through her early childhood. My grandmother knew and did nothing. In fact, there's reason to believe he did the same to my older aunt too. When she turned about 8 or 9, my uncle started to molest and eventually rape my mother. He was a teenager, and this carried on for years, until he left for college. My mom asked my grandmother for help to make him stop, at least to put him in a different bedroom. My grandmother did nothing, going so far as to tell my mom that her virginity, stolen by her brother, was just a piece of skin. My mother suffered with an incredible amount of trauma, abuse and depression from this. She acted out and did not graduate from high school. Rapist uncle, on the other hand, graduated from the Air Force Academy and had a family and a successful career. My mom finally told this secret to us and her other siblings about 7 years ago. I'm glad I know, so that she didn't have to keep such a terrible secret, but I would be so happy if that care ever died or killed himself. I hope you read this and kill yourself, David. I hope you encounter incredible suffering, and that you get to feel what it's like when there's no one willing to help you. I hope you will be consumed by your own pain and sadness. I found a suicide note on my dad's phone about a year ago. My cousin and his little sister has been engaging in sexual acts since 15. They still live in the same household. My mother once drowned a squirrel in a mason jar, then kept it in the freezer for a while. Edit. Dad says it was a baby squirrel. My paternal grandfather had a secret family we didn't find out about until they showed up at his funeral demanding an inheritance and making a huge scene. The look on my poor grandma's face, I'll never forget it. The man she had loved since she was 16, whom she'd been married to for 50 plus years, had just died a very agonizing and slow death from cancer, and she was confronted with his infidelity at his funeral in front of her children, grandchildren, and friends. My sister married her husband a few years ago, so he is now family. His brother raped and killed his boss's wife, then murdered his boss when he showed up home. He was put to death. His other brother shot himself in the head. The mom is a total wretch as well. I'm pretty positive she was off doing drugs while he was a kid alone, and I'm pretty sure he was sexually abused. My sister has donated her eggs a few times to families who can't conceive. She now has 3 biological children running around somewhere in the world. She won't be able to meet them until they turn 18, and only if they decide to contact her. My parents have no idea that they have been grandparents for almost 5 years now. My great uncle died in the worst way possible because he was afraid of my family. Our extended family is very southern and conservative, and also happen to be huge bigots. It's all they know. He lived with depression and alcoholism as a closeted homosexual until he moved to a different state and became somewhat of a recluse, which my family just claims is what he wanted. His partner died in the beginning stages of HIV of unrelated causes, and he died alone of AIDS. Nobody took care of him. Pisses me right off. I was a kid. Wasn't even that long ago, and that's just how some families are capable of treating each other. Now many years ago, when I was 23, I was married to a widow. This widow had a grown-up daughter who had red hair, and my father fell in love with her, and they got married. This made my dad my son-in-law and my daughter was my mother. To complicate the matter, I soon became the father of a bouncing baby boy. He then became a brother-in-law to dad, and so became my uncle, which also made him the brother of the widow's grown-up daughter, who was also my stepmother. Dad's wife then had a son, and he became my grandchild, for he was my daughter's son. My wife is now my mother's mother and my grandmother too. Now if my wife is my grandmother, then I'm her grandchild. As husband of my grandmother, I'm my own grandpa. Well, this is less crazy than that, but my mother and aunt, her oldest sister, have always gotten nauseous whenever Pink Floyd is playing. This had gone unexplained for the first 13 years of my life, until my dad, now divorced, and I were joking about it, and he made an offhand comment about not asking my mom why. So of course, I ask my mom why. After badgering her for perhaps a week, to her gradual discomfort, she explains that my grandparents, her parents, used to breed dogs and travel across the country to dog shows. They'd bring their 3 girls, and mostly the children were left unattended at these dog shows. My mom expressed anger and hurt at such irresponsible parenting on their part, and then dropped this bomb. Her and my oldest aunt think that their sister, my other aunt, was molested at one of these conventions while Pink Floyd was playing. They played popular music at these sort of things, so it's not unlikely. My mom says that her sister denies it and doesn't remember a thing, but the fact that her and my other aunt get physically sick at hearing Pink Floyd gives the story some weight. TLDR, my aunt was molested at a dog show, and now my mother gets sick when she hears Pink Floyd. My grandmother was 14 and my grandfather was 18, I think, when she got pregnant with my uncle. He was born shortly after her 15th birthday, and my mom was born a year later. Anyway, my grandmother's father shot himself in the head in the basement after finding out his daughter was pregnant. Apparently, when someone blows their brains out in your basement, I haven't had to look into this. Thankfully, no cleanup provided by the police. So my grandfather had to clean his pregnant 14-year-old girlfriend's father's brains off the walls. He has never spoken about it. Posted this a few weeks ago, but it applies. A few weekends ago, I was using my uncle's iPod during a graduation party. I was asking him about a bunch of apps, and if he had specific apps like Yelp or Urban Spoon. He assured me that he had both apps, and invited me to use them on his iPod. I opened Yelp, and apparently it saves the most recent search in case you accidentally close the app. The most recent search on my uncle's Yelp app was gay bars in Cleveland. My uncle is 45 years old, and has been single for as long as I can remember. With the exceptions of me and my uncle, my family is conservative and very Christian. I haven't said anything to him about it, and I'm not sure if I ever will. All I know is that I love my uncle and would support him if he ever tells me anything. Throwaway account. I don't know the story too well, as my father only once mentioned it in passing. Apparently my grandfather had a brother, didn't even know that. The reason I did not know of him is because he was sentenced to death in the 40s or so. He evidently robbed then murdered Harry Truman's secretary before Truman was president. That's all I know, and just about all I'd like to know. My uncle killed someone in Ireland during the Troubles. He was from Northern Ireland and killed a Republican in a premeditated murder around 40 years ago. He spent his time in jail and consequently played a large part in the peace process. I knew him for 10 to 15 years before I found out, and I'm glad it took me so long. I made my impressions of him before I found out a life-altering fact. My opinions haven't changed of him because of what I found out. My granddad was in the hospital recently for mixing up his medication. I know he was really attempting suicide. My aunt was raised by someone named Bunny and had a brother, Michael. Her whole life she thought Michael was her brother, and they acted like brother and sister. When Bunny died, my aunt found out the truth, that Michael was actually her father and had her when he was 13 or so. So Bunny took her and raised her as her own. Technically, Bunny never adopted my aunt because she wanted her to be able to decide when she was older whether she wanted to be Michael's daughter or Bunny's daughter. What the? My cousin in Quebec, who lives on a native reserve, sells cocaine and guns. He is also in a gang. Only I know for sure. The family has their suspicions. However, I'm the only one who has seen his loaded Glock, his $15,000 in cash and a relatively large brig of cocaine. Oh yeah, he also sells cigarettes across the US-Canada border. My aunt on my father's side was murdered about 25 years ago in her apartment at the time. She was 19. Going back to high school, my aunt had gotten pregnant during school with a black man's baby since the guy she was with at the time was, oh well, black. This infuriated my grandfather. Since she was neither married, we aren't religious, and since he was in a heavy group of shady Italian work, buying and selling things, nothing illegal, but still shady, and therefore was racist towards anything not American/Italian. Well, long story short, she dropped out of high school, eventually started to go back, after she had her child, my now amazing cousin, but at this point she was stabbed to death in her apartment. Even today they have never found who did it. But all in all, I personally believe that my grandfather deserves a large amount of the blame as to why this all happened, since she had to move to a very unsafe/unstable area to find housing, her apartment. This is something my grandparents don't know, that I actually know, since my cousin told me in secret, but I will say that following my aunt's death, my grandfather became fully open-minded, very kind, and helped keep my family together. At the time I wasn't born, so it can be said that even from the worst of things, good can come. My mom, while several months pregnant with me, had an affair with a priest. You could say I got baptized early. About 18 months after I was born, she left my dad, my brother, and I to go be a stripper. My half-brother after me was such a horrible kid. He pretty much destroyed my family. My parents tried to make him a ward of the state several times. For example, he was sadistic enough and smart enough. At age 3 he told my mom that after she falls asleep he was going to take a knife from the kitchen and kill her. No joke. So, now for the actual bad part. Considering how awful he was, when my mom found out she was pregnant again, she took every prescription pill she could find in the house in hopes of some sort of magical self-abortion recipe. So my next half-brother is born, and I wouldn't say he's flat out mentally handicapped, but he's very slow and definitely not firing on all pistons. My mother herself confided this to me in my late teens in some random guilt-inspired confession, probably in the hopes that I'd understand and sympathize. I've only thought she's the same kind of monster she was hoping to avoid. She ked my brother up. Big time. So yeah. Big dark family secret. One of them anyway. I hate my mother for more reasons than one.